So welcome again, everyone. This is the Comms Avenue, and we usually have these chats with senior executives and professionals in the communications industry, learning about their journey, their stories, things they want to share. And today, our first guest is Ayana McIntosh-Lee. And I'm really excited about this because even the first conversation that I had with her, just her enthusiasm and how she's really passionate about just sharing her story and helping other people as they rise through their career in communication. So I welcome Ayana once again. We will have a conversation, me and her, and then at the end of it, we'll do Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be looking at the chat. Or if you want to ask, you can always raise your hand and we'll call on you. So Ayana, are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'm going to be.
Awesome. Okay, so I mean, I've been researching you all week or since our conversation and just reading the amazing things that you've done. But I would just start with the basic question that people always ask. How did it all start? How did you begin this exciting journey?
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules, especially on a weekend, to join today. When I was asked if I would be willing to participate, I immediately, and I heard what the Comms Avenue was all about and what it was trying to do, I immediately said yes, because it matches with my values. And I know you hear that word a lot, values, and people, it's kind of the buzzword, now amongst executives and people in corporations talking about values. But I think for me, it was really important because so I was raised, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you, my mother is on today. I told her about it and she immediately sent an email out to everybody. So I can see her name, but I was very lucky in that I was raised in a family where I had lots of support. And I was raised with a saying, with whom much is given, much is required. And if you haven't heard that before, it basically means, if you've been blessed and you have talents and skills, you should share those with others. That's how I take it. A lot is required of you and you shouldn't hold those yourself. So this definitely matched with, with my core value of trying to share my experience and give back, because even if it just helps one person, then for me, it's a success because lots of people have helped me and supported me along my journey. So to answer your question of how this all began, I always sort of knew I wanted to do something in communications. I was lucky in that regard. But I will tell you that my parents had hoped I had done something in the STEM space, science, math, engineering, something technical, because I think most people don't think you can actually make a career and provide for yourself by going into communications. It's different now, but when I was growing up, I think it was sort of a feeling of, you want to be a journalist? Are you going to be able to pay the rent? Are you going to be able? What are you going to do with that noble? But definitely, they were more interested in interested in me going into math and science. But I was also a running joke that I never met a stranger. So communications always came very natural to me. And from early days, I started doing internships and got involved in communications. Even as a teenager, I interned at a radio station over the summer in Washington, D.C., where I had to do research, co-host a Sunday morning talk show, and that sort of thing. And so I was blessed that I had support, even though there was a feeling of, we really wish she would go off and do something in math and science. No one tried to block me. What I'll say, and then I'll stop before I get into sort of the career part of it. I thought I was a pretty good writer. When you're young, you think you're sort of great at everything. It wasn't until I got to university that I was faced with the reality that I had pretty poor writing skills. So when I got to university, I went to school in California. You have to take an exam, a writing exam, sort of an entrance, and I didn't pass the writing test. I was right on the fence. One passed me, one reviewer passed me, one reviewer did not pass me. So I went to a third person and they basically said, because you're on the bubble, you need to take remedial English. They called it English 1A. And I was crushed. I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. Me, not a good writer? Well, what do you mean I have to take remedial English? And then I learned that if you got an A in the class, that you didn't have to take the second half of the course in the second semester. So I went, aha, if I work really hard, then I can pass out of the second part of the course, English 1B, they called it. The good thing about that is because I worked so hard that I did get an A, but it's less about that. That's where my love for writing really started. My passion and love for writing started there. It wasn't easy. It took a lot of hard work, a lot of, sending things home and saying, does this sound right? Does this read right? Can you take another look at this from an editing perspective for me? Getting a lot of support, a lot of input and feedback, but that spark was there. And that's sort of how my real passion for writing and communications began. And from there, I did lots of internships to sort of hone my craft, interns at radio stations. I used to write for the campus newspaper, the Daily Californian, and then eventually my senior year, I felt like there weren't, okay, let me be honest here. I felt like anytime I saw an African-American in the big newspaper, sort of the campus-wide newspaper, it was for a negative reason. It was somebody that had gotten in trouble. It was this sort of negative stereotype that was being perpetuated about Black people and African Americans. And it just gnawed at me. I hated that. So my senior year, I took my passion for writing and my loathing for the fact that people that looked like me were only getting highlighted in the media that everybody read in a negative way, put the two together and worked with a bunch of talented and smart other students. And we started the African-American student newspaper on my university's campus called the Onyx Express. And it went on for years, even after we graduated, it went on. But the way we did it, we went out and got people to take out ad space. So we had money to fund the paper. We didn't just write it from our own views. We got other views. We ran hard news and interesting cultural kind of things. And I was the editor-in-chief. But I had a lot of smart, brilliant people around me that made it successful. And thus it lived, years beyond when we all graduated. So that was sort of my early start to communications. And then if you want to ask another question, you can, or I can then tell you what happened after I graduated.
I'd like to know what happened after, because that was going to be my question.
Okay. So I graduated and thought I had great experience, great skills, was ready to go, ready to get that big job and start making money, only to find out that none of my applications were being, accepted. I wasn't landing the jobs. I was going on interviews and they were kind of telling me, oh, you got great energy and spirit, but you got no experience. You got no real portfolio. And it was really hard. I remember those early days and I remember being distraught. I remember being down. I remember having conversations with my parents and saying, how do I make this work? And the first thought was, well, maybe you need to go back and get a master's degree in communications. And I thought, yes, that's what I need to do, more education. And then as I started talking to people who were working in the business, they gave me the opposite advice. And their advice was, you need real practical experience in communications. You can go get all the degrees in the world, but if you don't have a portfolio, we're not going to hire you. We don't care how many letters you have behind your name. And I went, okay. I need practical experience. I need a portfolio. Okay, got it. So then I started doing, even though I had already graduated, I continued to do internships. I got a day job because the rent had to be paid. I was living in California, which is very expensive. And I loved doing community work. I used to volunteer. I used to work and volunteer at an NGO, and they hired me full time. So I was able to work with young women and give back to the community in my day job while I worked nights, weekends, holidays to build the portfolio. Pretty much I would do almost, anything to get some real practical experience and to build my portfolio out. So case in point, I had a really good friend who was a cameraman at a television station, and he wanted to be a producer. So here I was with a little bit of experience, but wanted to be a professional journalist. But I needed a portfolio and I needed experience. Here he was, a cameraman, and we become good friends, and he wanted to be a producer. So we sort of matched up, connected, and said, let's help each other with building our portfolios. So sometimes he would call me up and say, the television station is not using the passes to X, Y, and Z. Do you want to go? And we can go get some practice and do some live shots. And I went, absolutely. And we would take those passes from the TV stations and we would go to events, and I would get my practice my skills during journalism and reporting. And he would be able to get some real practical experience shooting, for the kind of way that he was trying to build his portfolio as a producer and put it together. And a couple of times we actually got ran out of places. I can tell you one example where we showed up at a National Football League game, and we were on the sidelines, and I was practicing and he was shooting, and the PR guy came over and said, I know everybody from that station. And it was a Spanish speaking station actually. And he said, and you don't work for that station. You need to get out of here. And oh, by the way, if I catch you, talking to the guy who was the cameraman, my friend, he said, if I catch you doing this again, we're going to revoke your TV station's passes. So, he gave us a little bit of a thrashing. We were quite embarrassed, but not stifled, not in the least. It was just, we had lots of experiences like that, but we were hungry, young, and wanted to build and get the experience that we needed to really make careers in communications. So from there, I continued working in the NGO sector, and then I moved over to another nonprofit and was hired as the communications director, recruitment and communications director. And it was interesting because it gave me an opportunity. I had to go out and build campaigns to try to get the right people through the door to be mentors to young students in the area. And so that's where I really learned about target audiences, making sure the campaigns that I developed were fit for purpose, were driven, to the right, the right stakeholder. And so what do I mean by that? We had lots of volunteers, but what we really needed more of were African-American male volunteers. That was the one area that we had lots of young men, young boys who needed big brothers, big, mentors. And that was an area where we just could not quite get traction. So we ran some focus groups and found out that, there were some things holding them back. So I was able to build this campaign using sort of celebrities, some everyday people that targeted that group in particular. And it was called Anytime is Big Time, because one of the things that was holding them back is that they felt like they just didn't have the time to volunteer. And the message we wanted to get across, or I wanted to get across, was any time is valuable. And the name of the organization was Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So I started this campaign called Anytime is Big Time, and was able to go out and get some celebrities and some people involved in the campaign, ran them on television. When you work for an NGO, you have no money. So the beautiful thing about that is you get lots of experience. You get to roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty. You get, it's not like when you work in a big company where sometimes you only get to do a little bit. When you work in a NGO, you get to do a lot, and nobody's really going to tell you no, because, there's usually not enough money to go around. So I got great experience there, and learned about influencing. So I had to learn how to write for donors to raise money once I took over as not just the recruitment and communications person, but the development director. So, people don't just let go of their money easily. So I had to learn how to write for corporate donors, learn how to write for your average citizen to get them to donate, as well as try to get people through the door to volunteer and give up their time to be big brothers and big sisters. And so, that went really well. And one of the women that was on the board, I also worked closely with the board, the marketing team on the board. There was a woman on the board who kept telling me, you should really think about Chevron. And she had retired, African-American woman who had retired pretty early from Chevron. And I thought, me, corporate America? Oh, no, not me. I am not interested in working in corporate America. I am going to be a true journalist. But it was sort of in the back of my mind, but I shunned it. And then my portfolio was such that I finally got a shot, and I was hired at Fox Sports. So my first real professional role as a journalist, a true journalist, was in sports. And I covered, high school sports live into your living room. I covered professional sports. I covered college sports. And it was fascinating and interesting. And it looked glamorous, but it was hard work. But I was able to hone my skills because oftentimes I had to write. Sometimes I didn't have an editor to put my stories together into an actual piece to run on television. So I had to actually learn how to use the equipment, put the whole story together, do the editing myself, and learn how to pitch stories. So find an interesting story, find the right angle, pitch it to the producers, and then they'd say, yes, go do it. And then run off and put it together, show it. And if they liked it, they'd run it. Well, that was good because I learned what PR people liked and didn't like. So it gave me a different perspective and taught me sort of the so what test. And I still use it today when I'm thinking about pitching a story. Does it pass the so what test? Yeah, I think it's interesting. My company thinks it's interesting. But will the audience that we're trying to reach think it's interesting? Does it pass the so what test? As a communications person, that's a question we should always be asking ourselves is, so what? And if you keep asking yourself, so what, so what, so what, you will continue to dig, and refine your story to the point where you can get it and say, do I really think this is a good story? Will it really resonate with the audience? Will I really connect with people, the readers, the viewers, or does it not pass my so what test? So that was excellent because it helped me do that. Because sometimes I'd take a story that I thought was magnificent to the producers and they'd go, so what? Who cares? Or they'd go, great story. And I'd go to pitch it to the PR person, sort of, I call it the gatekeeper. And they go, so what? No, we're not interested. So it really helped me begin to hone my craft, not just as an ability to write, but also to pitch to the different audiences. So that was that bit. And then one day I was at the station and I don't know, it just popped into my head, this voice, this woman that I had worked with who said, you really should think about Chevron. So I went on something called, most of you may not know, it's called Craigslist. It was one of the early websites where people sold things, job boards, that kind of stuff. And I went on Craigslist, and I just started looking around for jobs, communications jobs. And I saw this role and I went, I can do that role. That looks like me, but I didn't apply. Fast forward, a few months later, same thing at the station one night. Let's see what's out there on these. Back to Craigslist, and I saw a job for a senior communications person, and I thought, that had my name written all over it. So I clicked on it, and it took me to Chevron's website. And I needed a CV, which I had ready, uploaded the CV, and it asked for a cover letter. Didn't have a cover letter. So I sat there and I wrote the cover letter off the top of my head, and I hit send, and there was, they call them brownouts. So it was like the electricity went down. And I just broke out in tears. I couldn't believe it. I had just wasted about an hour and a half to 2 hours doing this application. I hit send, and it wasn't that I hadn't saved it. It wasn't like I did it in Word and uploaded it. I was typing my cover letter onto the website, onto the page. And I just thought, this is disastrous. So I went home and I thought, well, it's just not meant to be. That's it. About 2 weeks later, a guy called me and said, hey, I head up Chevron's advertising team, and I'd like to interview you. What? He said, yeah, I got your application along with a few hundred others, and we're interested in interviewing you. Okay, all right. So I went to the interview, and I had fun. I want you to listen. Was I nervous? I remember being nervous. I'm sure I was nervous. But I remember going in, I had prepared, so I'd done some research, as you always should going into an interview. But I didn't take it so seriously that I went in petrified. I went in, and it was probably, to this day, the most fun interview that I ever had. The three people interviewing me, what I didn't know is that they had done some research and had talked to some people who were on the boards of the NGOs that I had worked for. So they knew more about me than I knew. So as my mom always says, you know, your reputation precedes you, you know? And so they had done some homework. So I remember them later saying, we hoped that the person who walked in the door was the person we saw on paper. And when I walked out of that interview, I remember thinking, that was fun. I really liked them. I got a good vibe from them. But if they don't hire me for this job, I think they'll call me for something else. And that was it. Lo and behold, I did get the role. And it really changed my career. It changed my flow, where I was going. All of a sudden, I was no longer working in television on a shoestring budget. I was no longer working in an NGO on a shoestring budget. All of a sudden, there was budget. I had a good idea. I could pitch it. I could demonstrate that it was, you know, going to add value to the organization. They'd say, go do it. Go do it. And one of the first stories that I pitched, I took it to my supervisor at the time. He was fantastic. And he went, yeah, I love it. Go for it. And I went, really? Like, really? I can do this? And he said, yeah, go for it. Do it. Super supportive, super supportive. And so I pitched it, and the story got picked up by Newsweek, all these big media outlets. I was shocked. It was the first story that really got picked up like that. And so I got a call, and it was from the chairman's office. And they said, hey, we asked around, and we wanted to know, the chairman loves this story, and he asked, who did it? And they said it was you. And we heard you're brand new to the company. I think I've been with the company a month. And they said, you hear we're brand new to the company. Chairman wants to meet with you. Would you be willing to come up and have lunch with him? Well, of course. That's, you know, that's like one of those IQ test kind of questions. Yeah, of course I want to have lunch with with the chairman of an international energy company. So I did. And he asked me questions about, why did you join the company? We have a hard time recruiting young folks because we're seen as stodgy, we're seen as bricks and mortar, old school. And when Silicon Valley and the tech industry is right up the road, why come here? We had a really honest conversation about what attracted me to the company and what things I saw, even in the month I'd been there, that the company needed to do to attract more young people. But what it also did is it gave me some more confidence. And every time they asked me, either I pitched a story or every time they asked me, would you be willing to, before they could even finish the sentence, I'd say yes. I'd always say yes. And sometimes I'd say yes. And then they'd walk out, because this was in the days where everybody had an office. And then whoever it was would walk out of my office, or I'd walk out of their office and go, what in the world did I just say yes to? I have no clue how to do that. I have no clue where to start. And I have no clue if I can do this well. But you know what? Yes. So one of the things I always tell people is, stay true to your values. I'm not saying say yes to things that are, going to hurt you or are bad for you. But when it comes to your career, stretch yourself. Say yes. Be uncomfortable, because that's where you really grow and learn and become better. And, diamonds. There's a reason why diamonds are made the way they are. You need that pressure, that uncomfortable feeling. And I remember one time I got this big project and they said, would you be willing to do this project? And I said, yes. The guy walked out of my office, grateful. And I just stared at the ceiling. I think I was on the verge of tears. I don't know what I don't know how in the world. But I called everybody I knew outside of the company, everybody I knew who had experience, a former supervisor, a friend, to get their ideas. This is what I'm thinking. I got this new project. How would you do this? This is how I'm thinking, and came up with a plan. The other thing, my father and mother always say, plan your work and work your plan. And we know as communications professionals, the last thing you want to do, if you can help it, is not have a plan. There's no way you can reach your targets, reach your audience, you don't want to be sort of Johnny come lately, half-baked. You want to have a plan. And sometimes in big companies, the communications team is seen as people that just sort of fly by night. They have the fun jobs. They get to go out and speak to people. They get to go to events. But what people don't see is all the hard work for it to look easy and to, flow and to be pulled off without a hitch. All the planning and the execution and the work that have gone on behind, the writing, the preparation, the briefs. So when you're executive, for example, whoever it is, or you show up, you're not just showing up talking off the top of your head. You actually put a proper plan in place. So the talking points are ready. Everything is smooth, It's like the duck, smooth on the top and underneath is doing this. And that's the preparation work that happens up until the point the event, starts, and even through the event. So that's the other thing I tell up and coming professionals. When I joined Chevron, I asked the woman who hired me, she became one of my mentors. And I asked her at the interview, I said, what is the most important, what's the key to success for this role? And she said, write. Hone your writing skills. Make sure you are a good writer. It is the building block. It is the base as a communications professional by which you should build on. And if you're a good writer, you will have many more opportunities than some people who think they know what communications is. And they're one-trick ponies. They have relationships, they can speak, but they can't write. So I always remember that and try to learn, grow, and do, and take the challenging assignments. I'll make it short because you may have some more questions. So I'll shorten it up from here. So from there, I did a year supporting the chairman and the executive team. We were a small team doing public relations, PR, that sort of thing. And then there was a reorganization. I went and worked on the press team. They asked me what I wanted to do. And I had been told that the most difficult job in the company for the press office was to do, there was this one role. And someone that I trusted in the organization and said, ask for that role, ask for the tough assignment. So I did. And they said yes. And it was hard. But I grew, I learned how to write better. I remember back then, it could take me half a day to write a solid press release. Honestly, half a day, maybe even longer. I'd sit in my office and write and rewrite again. But now, to do that would take me 30 minutes, maybe an hour, from experience, growing, learning, and practice. Then I was offered a role to go to New Orleans and actually sit with the business, learn the business. And so I took it. I would say, when you get opportunities, remember that, say yes. If you can get a really good opportunity and you have mobility, so if you have capability and mobility, it's a great combination. That was one of the things I was told early on in my career. Now it's very different, because of the internet, we're more global. You can do jobs. You can be on one side of the world oftentimes and do jobs on the other. So you have many more opportunities than back then, where you literally had to go physically be there as a communications professional. So, I moved to New Orleans. And again, it was one of the most difficult experiences that I had in my career. So what do I mean by that? I was different. I was a still young at that point, African-American woman, same company, but different cultural environment. I was the only person of color on the executive floor. I was by far the youngest person on the executive floor. And there were some people call them microaggressions. I just call them aggressions. There was nothing micro about it. And I had to learn and grow and really rely on my support network and the people that I trusted to help me figure out how to deal with the lack of diversity and inclusion and the challenges that were thrown at me, the things that were said to me that were inappropriate, unprofessional, probably could have gotten people fired had I gone at the time and reported them. And I could have quit. I could have packed up and quit and went back to California, where I felt like it was this melting pot and people were open and welcoming, but I didn't. I stuck with it. It was not easy. I'll give you a story. I was on my way up to a plant that was about a 4-hour drive from New Orleans with, at the time, a senior executive. He was driving, I was in the passenger seat. We got about an hour into the journey and he said, "So what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think it's going pretty well so far. Here's the things that I would change. Here's the things that, I think are going on track." And he says, "Well, let me see if I can help you." I said, "Oh, okay, great." And he said to me, "You see, we're not used to some young, uppity Black girl telling us what she does and doesn't think." It's kind of one of those weird out-of-body experiences. What? Young? And I almost missed it because I think I was so shocked that he said it to me. I said, "Did you just call me a young, uppity Black girl?" Like, there are so many issues with that, especially African-American, when you're African-American. And so they, you don't get offended. I can tell you're not from here and you move with a different swagger than the Black people from here. What? So we argued the whole rest of the drive up and the whole drive back. But there were many experiences like that over this 2-year period. Not to mention the fact that it was a job that really should have been a job for 3 people. And I was one person doing the public affairs job. And after 2 years, when I left that role, there were lots of crisis experience, lots of crises. The one thing the company asked me, they said, do you have any feedback? And I said, yes, this is not a role for one person. I didn't have weekends. I worked early and late all the time. And I said, this is really a job for 3 people. And they went, yeah, you're right. And sure enough, they split that job into 3 instead of 1. But once again, that experience, I grew volumes from being under that kind of pressure and having to be, really deliver a job for 3 as one person. But the beautiful thing is that I got a call one day from a guy who worked for another company, a competitor. And he said, I've heard about you and I want to come meet you. And I thought it was a joke. I thought it was one of those like camera, shows where they play a practical joke on you. So I thought it was my friends out in California on the press team playing a joke on me. And he said, I did some LexisNexis research and we know all about you. And I heard your name from some other folks in the business. And I went, yeah. And I was literally on the phone going, yeah. Because I thought it was a joke. Well, it wasn't a joke. And so when we hung up the phone, I also had access to LexisNexis. I did a search on him and he was a real person. And I went, oh, maybe he is for real. So a couple weeks later, actually about a week later, he flew in town. I walked out for lunch. We met, had a really good meeting. And within 2 or 3 weeks after that, I turned in my resignation, moved to Houston, joined the new company. And I've been with the company now 17 years. It was a great move for me in the sense that it was the same exact job, but a bigger portfolio and a bigger company at the time. So I was able to really, again, wider opportunities, hone my craft, lots of crisis experience. We had some major issues, but the one thing I was honest with everyone about is that I wanted to work international. And they basically told me, well, you're not an engineer, so the likelihood of you working international is very low. But we won't say no, never say never, but it's unlikely. So I would just tell lots of people, that, hey, oh, you're new to the company. What do you want to do? I want to work international. Oh, nice to meet you. I want to work international. So like I tell people, be clear about what you want and be clear about what you don't want. That's almost just as important about what you do want. And I would tell everybody, I want to work about. Sure enough, an opportunity opened up. And about 2 years into being with the company, there was an opportunity to go to Indonesia and do a 9-month assignment. And I jumped at it, absolutely. And that 9-month assignment turned into a 3-year assignment. And it was an amazing experience. I had to adapt to a completely different culture, way of doing things, learn how to do communications outside of my comfort level, my comfort zone, so to speak, practice a new set of skills. And it was communications, but it was external affairs. It was social investment in an area called Papua, in Eastern Indonesia. But it was amazing. It was life-changing, so to speak. So 1 year turned into 3. I went back to the US. And within a few months, the Deepwater Horizon accident in the Gulf of Mexico happened. And so I worked that significant crisis. And I knew I wanted to broaden. I had been applying for jobs, and they kept telling me, well, you're a communications person, you're a public affairs person, you don't have any government affairs experience, real government affairs experience. And through the crisis, the Deepwater Horizon crisis, I was able to get about as much government affairs experience as I ever needed. it was almost like living in dog years, where every 1 year was like 7. And it was intense. It was a lot of pressure. It was a horrible accident, but the response and the rebuilding and the relationship rebuilding and trust that had to be done after was one of those experiences that, most people will rarely have in their careers. And I intentionally didn't hire a government affairs person. So I led the team, but when it was time to hire a government affairs person, I chose not to. So I did 2 jobs. I did my own job as a general manager, but I also did the government affairs job. So I learned it inside out. So no one could ever say to me, you don't know government affairs. You don't know how to do government affairs. You've never done government affairs. Was it hard? Yes. Do I have lots of family support? Yes. My parents basically moved in and helped with my daughter and my husband and I, because I was working long hours. 20-hour days at the height of the crisis. And it was really intense, and I was away for long periods of time. But it was extraordinary. It was one of those, things that you're either up for it and you're going to do it, and you're going to have a support system to help you get the job done, or you're not. So the one thing I would say is make sure, it doesn't matter if it's family, friends, have a support system, professional and personal. Make sure you have a really strong support system. People that will tell you when things are great and when things are not so great, that will be honest with you about what's going well and what isn't. So I did that. I was there for 3 years, lived on the Gulf Coast. And then I got a call from one of the executives that said, would you come back to Indonesia because we want to do an expansion project? And I remember going in and telling my husband, guess where we're going? And he went, where? Where are we going this time? And I said, we're going back to Indonesia. What? Yeah, what? Shocking, because we thought that was it, 3 years and we were back in the US. So we went back. At that point, my husband and I we had 1 child. And then by the time the process was going on, I was pregnant with twins. So I had to call up the hiring manager, and say, guess what? And he said, you're pregnant. I went, yes. And he said, we'll wait. Yeah, he said, we'll wait. So go ahead, do your thing. And when you come back from maternity leave, we'll want you here immediately. I said, okay, great. As it stood, it took much longer to get my visa processed. So by the time we got back, my twins were 10 months old. I thought I was going to come off from maternity leave for 12 weeks, and then we were just going to move like immediately. But it so happened that it ended up being for 9-10 months later by the time we got there. So went back to Indonesia and covered East Asia, Southeast and East Asia. So the role expanded a bit. But I did it from Indonesia. And a big part of my role was building national capability. And it's the one thing that I think, it's one of the things I love the most about what I do, is helping to really nurture, train, develop up and coming talent. To me, the legacies that I'll leave in my career are less about, we did this deal, we made the shareholders, a few extra dollars. Yes, that's important. Yes, it is, because that's one of the things the company needs to do. But the impact that I can make on the teams that I work with, the people that I work with, that they're better than before we worked together, that I'm better for working with them, that I learned from them, and hopefully they learned from me, is really important. And the impact as a communicator that we can make on society. So a lot of what I do is not just communications, it's social investment. It's, working with communities. So I tell people all the time, I think I have the best job in the company. Why? Because I can work with, 1 minute I can be in the State House, meeting with a minister or the president. and the next day I could be, sitting on the floor or in a small community, working with the community to try to help them feel the benefits of our presence and make sure they are getting the benefits of us being there and helping them build their capability, build their communities, so that they are better off than when we arrived. So 3 more years in Indonesia, then I spent a year in Angola. And then for the last 3.5 years, I've been living in the UK with my family. And we have a new business in Mauritania and Senegal I work for an international energy company in Mauritania, Senegal, where we're building a new facility, a gas facility, working with local communities, working with key stakeholders, lots of writing. I work with an amazing team across the continent. And since July, my responsibility has expanded from Mauritania, Senegal, that business, to working with an amazing group of professionals across the continent of Africa. And when I say, I feel like, once again, I'm the luckiest person. I have the most amazing job in the company. I mean just that. It's been tough because since I've gotten the job during the era of COVID. So, I haven't been able to travel and to the different countries and really spend quality time on the ground with the team. But we've made the best of it by using, virtual tools, staying connected. I'm learning from them. It's been as good as it can be, and it's been an amazing experience. But it hasn't been the experience that I thought it would be pre-COVID. I normally would have spent more than 50% of my time on the continent. And actually, it's been nearly a year and I haven't traveled. I've been doing my role from here in the UK and just spending a lot of time on Zoom, on Teams, to stay connected with the team and make sure that, hopefully I'm giving them the support that they need to deliver their jobs, because that's my role. My role is to support the teams and try to, get the hurdles out of the way so that they can, be wildly successful. If they're successful, I'm successful. If they're not successful, I'm not successful. We either sink or swim together. We work hard, we play hard. Motto of mine, everybody I've ever worked with knows it. We work hard, we play hard, we laugh a lot. I mean, a lot. I feel like we spend so much time at work. It's such a big part of our lives that the least we can do is have fun, so we laugh a lot. And I try as much as I can to mentor up and coming professionals, give back, and to support both through mentorship and sponsorship. And that is very important, in your careers, to not just find mentors. And you can have many mentors. You can have professional mentors, technical mentors, personal mentors, but to also have sponsors, people who will fight for you, people who will, say good things about you and put your name up for opportunities, even when you're not in the room. People who believe in you, oftentimes when you're not even sure if you're ready for the role. People who will encourage you to take risks. And once again, as I said earlier, be honest with you. And I've been very lucky that I've had that kind of support system in my career. And just that, I've had amazing mentors and sponsors. And I am trying to and have tried to do that for others, because that to me is the biggest legacy that I'll leave, is the people and the careers and the lives that I will touch, is the most important part, I think, of what I'll do in my career and the legacy that I'll leave in my career. So that's about it. That is me. That is my career.
Wow. I've just been furiously taking notes. Amazing. Like, wow. And I already have a lot of comments dropping in, so I would share the comments. But I want you to please talk about, so when you started at Chevron and you took that chance, went for it, and now you finally find yourself in the C-suite role. A lot of comms professionals, they're used to talking about their brands, their organizations, but when it comes to talking about themselves, owning their work, getting a seat at the table, there's a disconnect. So what would you say to that? And especially, I love the point you raised about having a sponsor, but I also feel there's also a part of owning the work that you do and making the senior executives see the value in what you do, because sometimes I get the comments that, oh, they don't value communications, they think it's a fluffy role and all of that. So I would like you to please touch on that. How are you able to really project yourself to get into that C-suite level where you are, you know, it's clear that you deserve this seat at the table?
Yeah, good, great question. Well, getting a job and keeping a job and getting a job and doing a good job are very different things. So I often tell people that, you know, you have to bring value. I mean, really bring value. So one of the things I'd say is you need to, if, you know, when you're dealing, so I work with lots of engineers and lots of technical people, and you're right. So you're absolutely right to say there are those who think what we do is fluffy, you know, it's soft skills. And you know, sometimes, but what we do also is very technical as well. It's part art, part science, and you have to bring value. So the one thing I say is be connected to the business. It's so important. There are sometimes you have communications people that come in and they go, I think we should be doing X, Y, and Z. But it's totally disconnected with what the business is trying to achieve. So deeply, deeply, deeply learn the business, what the business, the objectives, the priorities for the business, because then the tactics, the tools, the strategy that you're building as a communicator will help the business meet those. Then they will look to you for guidance and advice. I've seen communications professionals who they've got great ideas, but it has nothing to do with the business. It's not helping the business succeed. So the business doesn't value them. The business doesn't look to them. But when you can demonstrate, you want to do X, this is how we're going to help you get there. And you have to tell them when X is not a good idea. You can't be afraid to push back. So oftentimes I have to push back. Let's say the business wants to do something and it's not gonna land well with our stakeholders. So you as a professional, you know stakeholders, communications, audiences, what's gonna land and what isn't better than anybody. So you have to be able to impart that, to take that to the business leaders and help them understand. You want to achieve X? Well, here's how you can do it from a non-technical risk perspective. Here are the risks, and here's how we can mitigate those risks. So yes, I know you want to do X, but maybe you can't do X, or maybe you can't do X right now. Or before you do X, here are the 5 things we need to do so that X will be easy. X will be available. Not, you know, so you're not there to be a yes person. You've got to bring value. You've got to show them that what you're doing is helping the business achieve its goals. And I promise you, if you can help them achieve their goals and help them look good, they will recognize and come back to you. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you find that, how do I say this? If you find that maybe they are being a bit dismissive, the first thing I would do is check to see if you are really and truly developing strategies and plans that are tied and connected and progressing the business or not.
Thank you for that. I have another question on the back of that. So, you know, you spoke about government affairs, you spoke about you, and you work in a field that is very technical, energy. So how much technical knowledge do you suggest, or do you think that communications professionals need to have? Because if you want to do government affairs, you need to know about the policy process, how the government operates, and even for you in your sector, you have to know a bit about what's going on. So how much technical knowledge, because a lot of communications professionals, sometimes we just stick to the comms side, and ignoring the fact that you also need a bit of technical knowledge. So how deep do you need to go to achieve some of what you just spoke about?
Yeah, great question. Learn as much as you can. You don't have to be the engineer. You don't have to be, or the technical person. It's not that you necessarily are trying to take their place and take their role, but the better you understand it, the better you can figure out what parts of it will help in your communications, will help drive your communications forward. So, I'm the queen of going into somebody's office or asking for time with people over the years and saying, sitting in a meeting and going, what in the world are they talking about? I have no clue what they're talking about. They just went right over my head with all that technical jargon. And then asking somebody, don't be afraid to look silly. I tell people, take your work seriously, take your work, be serious about your work, but don't take yourselves too seriously. Lighten up a bit. So I am the queen of asking somebody, can I just come spend a few minutes with you or give you a call? Because I have some questions. And then literally saying, I have no clue. Can you explain this to me? And you would be surprised how open people are if you're just honest and say, I need to be able to communicate about this, but to do so well, I need to be able to understand it. And people will give you the time. They'll help you figure it out. They'll explain it to you. And I always tell them, hey, explain it to me like you're explaining it to a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old. Why? Because I've got to be able to digest it and then turn it into messages or help tell the story in a way for the external audience. And guess what? Usually your audience is not technical. So if I can't tell the story in a way where I can understand it and people who are not technical can understand it, then how do we expect the regulator, the government, the community to understand it? It's not about dumbing down communications. That's not it. But it's about being able to tell it in a way, in layman's terms, so to speak, so that the audience gets it. Don't be afraid. Like I said, don't be afraid to ask the silly questions. Don't be afraid to say you don't know and you don't understand. Take the time to learn it, but also, so learn it and step back and say, A, does this pass the so what test? B, can I tell this in a better way where a non-technical audience can understand it? Or if you need to write, let's say you're writing for a technical journal, or do I understand it enough that I can write for the technical journal? Even better if you can do both.
Yeah. Wow, thank you so much. And I'm going to ask for a bit of more time because we have a number of questions. And we did talk about it, that there will be questions. So I'm going to start. There's the so what criteria that you just mentioned. So somebody is asking, what will be the key things to look out for that will fit this so what criteria when you are pitching a story to the media?
Yeah. So when I talk about so what, so, when you're building out a campaign for communications, you all know this better than I do. You have to ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve? What is the main objective? Who is the audience you're trying to reach? So you could end up having messages for different audiences, in a campaign as a communicator. You could have one message. They need to be aligned. You can't tell one group one thing and another group something completely different, because people talk, they'll figure it out. So, you have to build trust and be transparent. But the point is, how you tell the message might be different depending on the audience. How you might say it to the president or a minister might be very different than when you're in a local community telling the message. So the first question to ask is, who is the audience and what matters to them? What do they care about? And so in communications, they're the concentric circles. It's here's what I want people to know and do or act on. Here's what they're interested in and what they want for themselves, their communities, their country, their whatever. And where they cross, so to speak, in that middle is the sweet spot. And the sweet spot in communications is your so what. Otherwise, you will always be two completely different circles, and you will be telling a story that they don't care about because it's not valuable to them. They don't care. They don't need it. It doesn't move them because it doesn't meet their objectives. So the sweet spot is that middle ground. If you can figure out your audience and you can tell a story, not just that you want them to know, but that they will be interested in, now you found the sweet spot where it will potentially pass the so what test.
I like that analogy very well, because sometimes you want to say something and people are not really interested. So how do you find that middle ground that gets them interested? Okay, so next question, I'm going to combine this into one. So someone is saying, in this world of tech advancement, is there still a space for PR and journalism in today's world? And then aside from, you said you started with journalism and you got into comms, what other ways can people get into communications without maybe being a journalist?
Great. The answer to the first question, the short answer is yes. There is absolutely still a place for PR. And if you've got good writing skills, you can do a lot in the space. There are companies still need to go out and tell their stories. People still need customers. And so there's communications, there's marketing, but it's that communications that is the base for it all. Every company or every business has an audience, some audience, whether you're in it to make money or you're in it to do good or you're in it you got to be able to tell your story. If you don't tell your story, if you don't have pretty good PR, you could have the best product or service in the world if nobody knows about it because you haven't told your story, because you haven't done good PR. It's just a good product nobody knows about. So there's absolutely still a place for good, solid, strong PR, even in the tech world, especially in the tech world, because now there's so much out there, there's so much on the web, there's so much communications. So being able to write well and do it in a way that really resonates with the audience that you're trying to reach is even more important, because I think, to be honest, people are overwhelmed with communications. And there's so much coming at people. When I read something that is really well written, I notice it. I pause. I go, oh, that was good. I remember it. And that's why there's still a space for good PR and good communicators. The second question, can you remind me the second question?
So she was saying, to get into comms, if you don't want to go through being a journalist, what other ways can you get into comms?
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, good question. So when I'm hiring, what I'm looking for is good writing skills, because that is the base. And I'm looking for someone with good experience. Doesn't have to be a journalist. In fact, one of the things I found in my career is that sometimes people who have been journalists struggle to make the transition successfully over into the PR side, the public relations side of the business, because they're used to being the receiver of information and writing stories. And so when it's time to be the person, the PR person, pitching the stories to the journalists, they sometimes struggle to make that change, to be able to pitch and pass the so what test. So one of the things I look for is people who have worked in agencies. So maybe not as a journalist, maybe never a journalist, but maybe they've worked for ad agencies. That's a great way to get experience. To work for marketing firms, ad agencies, any place where you can write, doesn't necessarily, and have a strong portfolio, get good experience, to be able to work with clients. Ad agencies are really good for that. Because oftentimes if you work for an ad agency, you have to work with multiple different clients. And if you go and work in a company like mine, you also have to be able to work well with different, I call them internal clients. Plus you have external stakeholders. So, if you come from an ad agency, you can often navigate that really well. Another way is campaigns. So if you're in the US, for example, you can go volunteer working on a campaign. We just had a big presidential campaign in the US, and people around the country who volunteer and work on those. You can volunteer and write, you can volunteer and do comms. So I've hired people who, like I had a guy who used to work for me who majored in engineering and was his degree. And he started as an engineer. He really he had a passion for communication. And so he started volunteering on campaigns and sort of worked his way up and eventually became a really good communications professional, unpaid initially, working and volunteering for different campaigns until he got to a point where he was a senior person on campaigns, communications, communicator writing, etc. And he built an amazing portfolio. Now, in some countries, you don't necessarily have the same type of, you still have campaigns, but it's not always the same. There's not always the opportunity to volunteer in that way. But in many countries, there is that opportunity. So I would say it's anything where you can get practice writing for specific audiences. You can start blogs. You can have your own blog. You can go write for companies, who maybe don't have a lot of money. Maybe they're startups and they're looking to develop their company and build customers, get clients. They don't have a lot of money to pay, but you're looking to build a portfolio, and that gives you an opportunity because you get to practice, you get to hone your skill. So I'd say almost anything that gives you a chance to practice your writing. Remember, write. Try writing for different audiences. Try writing for different media formats, because it's good to have range, to be able to write, for internet, could be for radio, write speeches, write briefs, write business letters, so you want to have range in your your portfolio, so to speak. I would definitely recommend that. But there's lots of ways out there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you've heard it right. I really agree, because the amount of writing that you do is actually a lot. And I love how you said that when you first started, you could take half a day to write a press release, and now it takes you 30 minutes. And that's come with experience, learning on learning, which is also very critical. So the next question, I'm just going to take 2 more questions because we have to let Ayana go and attend to her day. So somebody is asking about the most critical lessons you've learned in crisis management, but I also want to just expand that question a little bit. So we're living in a time where you have very socially conscious consumers. So people are speaking about sustainability, climate change, responsible business practices, and as somebody in communications or public affairs, those are things that you even need to be ahead of. So it's not even a case of corporate social responsibility responses from organizations. This needs to be incorporated in our operations and strategy. How, as a communications professional, should you position yourself to be aware or a step ahead of those issues so that they don't become a blind spot in your organization, as a whole? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. So I would be more than you must be more than a communicator. Try not to look at yourself as just a communicator. And I don't mean that in a bad way. And I don't mean that if you are a communications professional, that's bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, as a communications professional, what you should be looking for is to be a non-technical risk manager. So you're trying to manage and look out for the opportunities and the risks so that you are planning for it. Remember that whole plan your work and work your plan. So you will have, at the end of every year, looking ahead to the next year, for example, you should really be looking and saying, what is our business trying to achieve? Where are they going to be going over the next 12 to 24 months? What is our role in that? What are the opportunities that, as a communicator, I can help the business achieve? And what are the risks that are out there? Because they may very much be focused on the technical aspects of what they have to deliver. Could be building something, could be, whatever the business that you're working in. Whereas your job is to be able to look out ahead, not just at what's on the windshield, but look far down the road and say, what hazards are coming, or, oh, wait a minute, we haven't stopped in a while. Maybe we've got children in the car. Maybe we should take a break so, everybody can have a comfort break. It's that planning ahead and then building for it. Everything can't be a crisis. You should try to plan 80 to 90% of what you do. There are crises out there. There are things that pop up, but try to avoid the reputational accidents. And I use the word accident intentionally. Things happen. You can't control all communications in this world. It's just not going to happen. I've worked through many a crisis, and I can tell you that sometimes the technical folks are like, well, why can't you just make everybody love us? Well, did you see what happened? The whole world is seeing it. I mean, you can't hide it, not in a 24-hour news cycle, global communications, social media world. You can't hide what happened. We can make it better. We can rebuild trust. But incidents do happen. But from a non-technical risk management perspective, as a communicator, you should be trying to identify those risks, those non-technical risks, and plan for them early and often, and of trying to avoid the crises and the oh no moments as much as possible.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question and then ask maybe if anybody has questions after, I can just send them to you so that we can let you go. And the final one, I find it very interesting, and it's what is a typical day in your life, like a typical working day? I would love to hear your answer to that, because I'm not sure there's a typical working day, but let's see.
Oh, no, that's a great question. They've been more typical since I've been working remotely. It's been a little bit more consistent than normal. Normally, it might, like I said, I would spend more than 50% of my time traveling. So on the continent with teams, with the teams that I work with, working with the business, etc. These days have been very different because I'm working remotely. And so, but lots of meetings, lots of time in front of the camera, planning sessions, it's that asking that constant question of what are the opportunities, what's coming ahead, being sure the plans that we have put together are being met. So, for example, I do every 2 weeks, I have one-on-one check-ins with the team members that report into me. to see how things are going. How can I do to help? What can I do to help? How can I help? If I can help, is my helping sort of getting out of the way and just letting them get on with it? Do they need anything? So it's a lot of staying connected with people to make sure the team has the resources and the support it needs to deliver the agreed plan for the year. So it's quite a lot of that. It's a lot of making sure I'm understanding the issue, deeply understanding the issues, so that I can advise and guide and develop the right strategies and plans. It's always some writing. I'd say at least once a day, I am either drafting or reviewing and providing input on a brief, on, some talking points, some messages, something for the press, putting together a communication strategy. And I say communications and engagement strategy or plan. So it's a lot of that. And I think the biggest challenge, especially working remotely, is balance. Because if you're not careful, as you climb in your career, so to speak, the hours can be long, and trying to find that balance and put barriers in place can be very difficult. So if I would give any advice, I would say, try to maintain balance, because no one finishes their career, and sort of, one day, when that's it, you usually look back in life and say, I wish I had worked another hour. I wish I had spent another hour on a Zoom call. I wish I had spent another hour in the office or on an airplane. It's not usually what you say. You usually say, I wish I'd spent more time with my family. I wish I had focused more on the things that I love. I wish I had, taken up that hobby that I always wanted to do. So try to keep it in perspective. Again, take your craft seriously, but not yourself. Remember that you work to support your family, your life, you don't live to work, you work to live. And if you can try to keep that balance and keep it in perspective, and it can be very hard to do, I think you will appreciate it, and the people who love you and who you love will appreciate it more as well.
Wow, thank you so much. I really, really, really learned a lot. So if people want to connect with you, how can they connect with you? LinkedIn, Twitter?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is probably the best way. I have Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts, and I will tell you, that's not where I spend most of my time. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn and the social media channels that I use for work. So that's primarily to connect with me personally. LinkedIn is definitely the best way.
Awesome. So everyone who wants to connect with Ayana, please do so on LinkedIn. So do you have any last words before we go? Anything you just want people to remember or take away from this session?
Yeah, I would just say, well, thank you. I appreciate you, spending time with me and letting me share my story and my journey. I hope it, something resonated with all of you as communications professionals. I remember what it was like when I was just starting and up and coming, and I'm still learning a lot. But the one thing probably the biggest message I would leave you with is have fun. As a communicator, keep writing, have fun, and just have a good support system and network around you, whether it's mentors, sponsors, and just, keep at it, because you will be wildly successful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Please, let's say a huge thank you to Ayana for her time. She spent an extra 16 minutes with us, or 18 minutes. We're super, super grateful, Ayana. And I hope everyone has learned from this. And you also just received that boost of confidence to also go for it in your journey and, learn the lessons that you can learn from her journey and implement them as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ayana. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me. You too. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.